जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी। जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी। जय गोपीजन वल्लभ गिरिवरधारी। जय गोपीजन वल्लभ गिरिवरधारी। यशोदानंदन व्रज जनरंजन। यशोदानंदन व्रज जनरंजन। यमुनातीरवनचारी। यमुनातीरवनचारी। जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी। जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी। जय गोपीजन वल्लभ गिरिवरधारी। जय गोपीजन वल्लभ गिरिवरधारी। यशोदानंदन व्रज जनरंजन। यशोदानंदन व्रज जनरंजन। यमुनातीरवनचारी। यमुनातीरवनचारी। जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी। जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी। जय ओम विष्णुपाद परमहंस परिव्राजकाचार्य अष्टोत्तर शत श्री श्रीमद अभय चरणारविंद भक्ति वेदांत स्वामी श्रील प्रभुपाद की जय। जय ओम विष्णुपाद परमहंस परिव्राजकाचार्य अष्टोत्तर शत श्री श्रीमद Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Goswami Maharaj Prabhupada ki jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai. Nam Acharya Srila Haridas Thakur ki jai. Prem se kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shrivas Adi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda ki jai. Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopi Goshyama Kunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan ki jai. Shri Mathura Vrindavana Dham ki jai. Shri Navadvip Mayapur Dham ki jai. Shri Jagannath Puri Dham ki jai. Ganga Mai ki jai. Yamuna Mai ki jai. Tulasi Devi ki jai. Bhakti Devi ki jai. Samaveta Bhakta Vrinda ki jai. All glories to the Samad devotees. Hare Krishna. All glories to the Samad devotees. Hare Krishna. All glories to the Samad devotees. Hare Krishna. All glories to Shri Shri Guru and Shri Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. We're reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 6, Chapter 16, Text number 10. Na hi asyasti priya kashchin na priya swa paropi va eka sarvadhyam drashta karitrinam gunam doshayo na hyasyasti priya kashchin na priya sva paropi va eka sarvadhyam drashta karitrinam gunadoshayo na hyasyasti priya kashchin na priya svavaropi va eka sarvadhyam drashta karitrinam gunadoshayo na hyasyasti priya kashchin na priya svavaropi va eka sarvadhyam drashta karitrinam gunadoshayo na hyasyasti priya kashchin Anybody else?
Nahi asyasti priya kashchin.
Asyasti priya kashchin.
Na priya svaparopi va.
Priya svaparopi va.
Eka sarvadiyam drashta. Kartrinam guna doshayo.
Anybody else on Zoom?
I don't think. Oh, Tapas Prabhu maybe.
Yeah, maybe I was thinking Tapas Prabhu could chant if he's there.
He is here, but he's still mute.
Okay. Okay, no worries. Okay, we can move on. Na, not. He, indeed. Asya, to the living entity. Asti, there is. Priya, dear. Kashchit, someone. Na, not. Apriyaha, not dear. Svaha, own. Paraha, other. Api, also. Va, or. Ekaha, the one. Sarvadhyam, of the varieties of intelligence. Drashta, the seer. Karitrinam, of the performers. Gurnadoshayoho, of right and wrong activities. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. For this living entity, no one is dear, nor is anyone unfavorable. He makes no distinction between that which is his own and that which belongs to anyone else. He is one without a second. In other words, he is not affected by friends and enemies, well-wishers or mischief-mongers. He is only an observer, a witness of the different qualities of men. Purport. As explained in the previous verse, the living entity has the same qualities as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, but he has them in minute quantities because he is a small particle, sukshma, whereas the Supreme Lord is all-pervading and great. For the Supreme Lord there are no friends, enemies, or relatives, for he is completely free from all the disqualifications of ignorance that characterize the conditioned souls. On the other hand, he is extremely kind and favorable to his devotees, and he is not at all satisfied with persons who are envious of his devotees. As the Supreme Lord himself confirms in Bhagavad Gita 9:29, Samoham sarva bhuteshu namai dveshasti na priyaha ye bhajanti tumam bhaktya mai te teshu chapyaham. I envy no one, nor am I partial to anyone. I am equal to all, but whoever renders service unto me in devotion is a friend, is in me, and I am also a friend to him. Unquote. The Supreme Lord has no enemy or friend, but he is inclined toward a devotee who always engages in his devotional service. Similarly, elsewhere in the Gita 16:19, the Lord says, Tanaham dushata kruran samsareshu naradhaman kshipam yajasram ashubhan asurishveva yonishu. Those who are envious and mischievous, who are the lowest among men, are cast by me into the ocean of material existence, into various demoniac species of life. The Lord is extremely antagonistic toward those who are envious of his devotees. To protect his devotees, the Lord sometimes has to kill their enemies. For example, to protect Prahlad Maharaj, the Lord had to kill his enemy Hiranyakashipu, although Hiranyakashipu attained salvation because of being killed by the Lord. Since the Lord is the witness of everyone's activities, he witnesses the actions of the enemies of his devotees, and he is inclined to punish them. In other cases, however, he simply witnesses what the living entities do and gives the result of one's sinful or pious activities. Om Ajnanatimidandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Nama Shreshtham Manamapi Shachiputra Swarupam Rupam Tasyagrajam Urupurim Mathurim Goshtavatim Radha Kundam Girivaramaho Radhika Madhavasham Prapto Yasya Pratita Kripaya Shri Gurum Tannatosmi Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yutapadakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakan Vitamscha Vancha kalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya evacha patitanam bhavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So we're now coming to the end of the relatively short teachings of the jiva who is within the body of Harsha Shoka, who is Maharaj Chitraketu's son, at least in this life. I'll just read, it's just been a few verses, I'll just read the text of those verses so we can get an idea of where we're, of the progression of the instructions. So, let's see, where does it start? Aha. Yes, so Sri Shukadev Goswami said, "My dear King Parikshit, by his mystic power, the great sage Narada brought the dead son into the vision of all the lamenting relatives and then spoke as follows. Sri Narada Muni said, O living entity, all good fortune unto you. Just see your father and mother. All your friends and relatives are overwhelmed with grief because of your passing away. Because you died untimely, the balance of your lifetime still remains. Therefore, you may re-enter your body and enjoy the remainder of your life, surrounded by your friends and relatives. Accept the royal throne and all opulences given by your father." So Narada Muni gives him the opportunity. He says, okay, come back. You didn't live out this full life, so you were going to live another life. But for the sake of teaching Maharaj Chitraketu, he said, come back into this body, and he gives him a chance. He said, come on back, enjoy the throne, be surrounded by your friends and relatives, live the rest of your life, etc. And so then it says, by the mystic power of Narada Muni, the living entity re-entered his dead body for a short time and spoke in reply to Narada Muni's request. According to the results of my fruitive activities, I, the living being, transmigrate from one body to another, sometimes going to the species of the demigods, sometimes to the species of the lower animals, sometimes among the vegetables, and sometimes to the human species. Therefore, in which birth were these my mother and father? No one is actually my mother and father. How can I accept these two people as my parents? So Narada Muni says, come on back. And the living entity says, I'm forgetting, what's going on, I don't know who these people are. And so then he says, in this material world which advances, this is the jiva speaking now, in this material world which advances like a river that carries away the living entity, all people become friends, relatives, and enemies in due course of time. They also act neutrally, they mediate, they despise one another, and they act in many other relationships. Nonetheless, despite these various transactions, no one is permanently related. Just as gold and other commodities are continually transferred from one place to another in due course of purchase and sale, so the living entity, as a result of his fruitive activities, wanders throughout the entire universe, being injected into various bodies in different species of life by one kind of father after another. A few living entities are born in the human species, and others are born as animals. Although both are living entities, their relationships are impermanent. An animal may remain in the custody of a human being for some time, and then the same animal may be transferred to the possession of other human beings. As soon as the animal goes away, the former proprietor no longer has a sense of ownership. As long as the animal is in his possession, he certainly has an affinity for it, but as soon as the animal is sold, the affinity is lost. Even though one living entity becomes connected with another because of a relationship based on bodies that are perishable, the living entity is eternal. Actually, it is the body that is born or lost, not the living entity. One should not accept that the living entity takes birth or dies. The living being actually has no relationship with so-called fathers and mothers. As long as he appears as the son of a certain father and mother as a result of his past fruitive activities, he has a connection with the body given by that father and mother. Thus he falsely accepts himself as their son and acts affectionately. After he dies, however, the relationship is finished. Under these circumstances, one should not be falsely involved with jubilation and lamentation. The living entity is eternal, so this is yesterday's verse. The living entity is eternal and imperishable, and because he actually has no beginning and no end, he never takes birth or dies. He is the basic principle of all types of bodies, yet he does not belong to the bodily category. The living being is so sublime that he is equal in quality to the Supreme Lord. Nevertheless, because he is extremely small, he is prone to be illusioned by the external energy, and thus he creates various bodies for himself, according to different desires. And then today's verse, for this living entity no one is dear, no one is unfavorable. He makes no distinction between that which is his own and that which belongs to anyone else. Excuse me. He is one without a second. In other words, he is not affected by friends and enemies, well-wishers, or mischief-mongers. He is only an observer, a witness of the different qualities of men. So what this living entity is emphasizing, largely is emphasizing the, you could say, the aloofness or the separateness of the Atma, the liberated soul, from the material world, and then from all the things that kind of come with the material world. And then we'll see in the next verse, in coming verses, that the jiva will emphasize actually that the jiva's or the Atma's relationship with the Supreme Lord, with the Supreme Atma. So the living entity is described, he's a Shakti, or he's an energy or an amsha of the Supreme Lord. A nice example I heard in Nyaya, or Vedic logic, there's 3 factors of a particular object. There's Vishesha. Vishesha is like you could say the unadulterated thing itself without any, you could say, qualities. And then there's Visheshana, or the thing's qualities. And then there's Vishishta. Vishishta being the thing itself. So the example that's often given is like a red rose. So in order to have a red rose, you have the rose separated from its redness. That's Vishesha. And then you have the redness, which is Visheshana. And then you have Vishishta. Vishishta is the red rose. So the Shakti of the Supreme Lord, which includes the living entities, is described as like a Visheshana, or a you could say like a quality or an aspect of the Supreme Lord, without which the Supreme Lord is not, you could say, complete. It's an intrinsic part of him. And so because the living entities, being the Lord's Shakti, the Lord's energy, are an intrinsic part of his being, of his existence, they have certain qualities. They share qualities between the two, the living entity and the Supreme Lord. And so there's 21 primary intrinsic qualities of the living entity, which are given in the Padma Purana. I'll just read those. So, well, actually there's 18 given in the Padma Purana. And then Jiva Goswami, Jamadhar Muni, who's a Sri Vaishnava Acharya, he adds 3 to those. And then those are the 3, and then that list of 21, 18 plus 3, is accepted by Jiva Goswami as basically our understanding within our Sampradaya. So the 21 qualities are as follows. It's not a plant, a demigod, an animal, or a human. The soul is not the body, senses, mind, prana, or intellect. The soul is not inert, is not subject to change. It's not just knowledge alone. The soul is self-luminous. The soul reveals himself to others and others to himself. The soul is of one form. The soul is situated in his own essential nature. The soul is conscious, pervades the body. It's intrinsically the nature of knowledge and bliss. It has its own identity. It's distinct from other individual selves. It's atomic. It's eternal. It's pure. And then these are the 3 that Jamadhar Muni adds. It's a knower, it's a doer, and it's an enjoyer. And then the last one is that it's a servant of Paramatma at all times. So it's a servant of the Supreme Lord at all times. So you can see, if you just reading these qualities, you can see that all of them, practically speaking, pertain to the Supreme Lord. The soul is actually quite similar to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, but like Prabhupada says in this purport, as explained in the previous verse, the living entity has the same qualities as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, but he has them in minute quantity, because he's a small particle, sukshma, whereas the soul is all-pervading and great. So the living entity being, you could say, like an inseparable part of the Supreme Lord's being, this is a Chintya Beta Beta Tattva. Just like you can't separate redness, you can only know a thing by its intrinsic qualities. So for example, redness, or like a red rose, you know it by its redness because the redness is an inseparable part of that rose. The redness isn't the rose itself, but it's an inseparable part of the rose by which the rose is to be known as a rose. So similarly, the Supreme Lord, the energy of the Supreme Lord, means including the living entities or the Swarup Shaktis, which manifest his abode, his form, etc. Those are an intrinsic part of him. They're not him, but they're an intrinsic part of him without which he's not complete. You can't separate those two things, but they're also not exactly the same. So, yeah, with that in mind, the living entities are always related to the Supreme Lord. Mostly this means that they're in the spiritual world and they have a relationship with him. But as is just described in the previous verse, there are some, like the previous verse says, he is prone to be illusioned by the external energy, and thus he creates various bodies for himself according to his different desires. So the living entity has two options, basically. Krishna gives him two options. He can either act within the Swarup Shakti, or the Krishna spiritual energy, and this is called Bhakti. This is a relationship with the Supreme Lord. Or he can act with the Maya Shakti, or the Lord's external energy. And this is what we know as bondage. So it's described in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, and of course in other places, even right here. It's described that there are some who choose to try to, you could say, make it, by themselves in the material world, becoming envious of Krishna's position as the center, and therefore they themselves desire to be the center. They themselves desire to be the enjoyer, the supreme enjoyer, or the proprietor, like that. So Krishna, he gives facility to those living entities in the form of the material world. And so that material world is dominated, is pervaded, is the jurisdiction of the Maya Shakti, of Krishna's external energy. And so the living entity comes to the material world because he's not the controller of the spiritual energy. He can't. It's just not possible. The living entity is controlled by the spiritual energy, or acts within the spiritual energy, but he can't move it on his own. So Krishna gives some facility. He says, okay, go to the material world. You can try to make your way there. And although it's described in these 21 qualities that the living entity, one of the three that Jamantra Muni adds is that he's a doer. So although the living entity in the material world, he's trying to do or to act with that external energy, what actually happens is that the external energy, he doesn't become a doer. He actually renounces basically his position as a doer. And everything in the material world is carried out by the external energy. That's that verse in the Bhagavad Gita, Prakrite kriyamanani gunai karmani sarvashaha ahankara vimudatma karta ahamiti manyate. So the living entity in the material world, he's thinking, because of his false ego, he's thinking that I'm doing all these things, I'm arranging all these things, I'm making a life for myself, or making a niche for myself in the material world. But actually, it's the exact opposite. Actually, he's being pulled by the external energy to do different things. So it's kind of like, you see some people, sometimes they're walking their dog. So I know everybody likes to rag on dogs in Bhagavatam class, but this isn't the same thing. So when you see somebody walking their dog, they got this big dog, and they think, okay, I'm the owner of this dog, I'm going to go take my dog for a walk. But practically speaking, they're walking, but the dog is pulling them. They're going here, they're going there, and they even might try to pull the dog back, but the dog resists. I've had that experience. The dog resists, and they say, okay, and so they're being walked by the dog. So then, the same way, the living entity, he thinks that he's arranging all these things for himself. He thinks that he's the doer in the material world, but he's not. And therefore, Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami describes that he becomes Kama Krodher Das. He becomes the servant of lust and anger, and he suffers in various ways. Krishna Buli She Jiva Nadi Bahirmukh Ateva Mayatare Deya Samsar Dukh. That the living entity, forgetting Krishna, he enters into Maya, and then he suffers various miseries in the material world. This world is Dukkalayam Ashashvatam. It's temporary and it's miserable. Krishna designs it that way, actually. And some might argue that, well, that's not very nice. Why would Krishna let us suffer? He's supposed to love us, and it's true. Krishna consciousness, bhakti, which is our inherent nature and the nature of Krishna, it's a relationship. It's a relationship between Krishna, and it's a relationship between between the conditioned souls and Krishna, or not the conditioned souls, but the souls in general and Krishna. And this relationship it's based on loving exchanges between Krishna and the devotees. And there's unlimited devotees in the spiritual world, actually just unlimited devotees in the spiritual world, which is inconceivable to us. And Krishna's reciprocating with them according to their unique relationship with him. No two devotees have the same relationship. It's like a fingerprint. One's relationship with Krishna is like your fingerprint. Everybody has their own unique one. And so Bhaktivinoda Thakur described this in one song. He says, Swarasiki Siddhi Braja Gopi Dhana. Paramachancha, and he describes. But then the significant, he says, Swarasiki Siddhi Braja Gopi Dhana, that the wealth, he's specifically talking about the gopis in this regard, but it goes for all the Vrajvasis, that the wealth of the Vrajvasis is that they have Swarasiki Siddhi, that they each have their own unique relationship with Krishna, and no two are the same. No two devotees reciprocate with Krishna in the same way. And so these exchanges of love with Krishna, they produce rasa based on the type of relationship that is there. They produce different types of rasa. So rasa is basically transcendental pleasure within a particular relationship or of a particular mode. So there's madhurya rasa, or the pleasure that's tasted between lovers, or there's sakya rasa, the pleasure that's tasted between friends, etc. And so there's unlimited types, and Krishna really likes this. This is what Krishna is all about. Krishna is all about rasa, and all about that relationship. In fact, he so much values this that he describes in the 10th canto, after the rasa dance, or you could say before the rasa dance. He says, there's this verse, he says, Napare eham niravadya samyujam svasadu krityam vibudhayushapi va ya ma bhajan durjara geha shrinkala samvrishya tadva pratiyatu sadhana. I am not able to repay my debt for your spotless service, even within a lifetime of Brahma. Your connection with me is beyond reproach. You have worshipped me, cutting off all domestic ties, which are difficult to break. Therefore, please let your own glorious deeds be your compensation. So Krishna, he so much appreciated the relationship or the exchanges of love that he experienced with the gopis that he said, Krishna could give the entire universe. Krishna could give more than the entire universe. Krishna could give you absolutely everything. But he felt like the exchange of love that he had with the gopis was so pleasurable, was so amazing, that he felt so indebted that he felt like he couldn't repay them with anything, which is pretty amazing, because what did the gopis really give him in terms of, like, you know, like you could say like a tangible thing? They didn't really do much. I mean, they danced together, of course, and they, you know, they decorate each other with flowers and whatnot. But in terms of, like, you could say like an opulent offering or something like that, you could say externally, there wasn't much there. But it was the exchange of love that Krishna valued. And Krishna values it a lot. He values it so much that even sometimes in Shastra, Krishna is described as himself being rasa. Rasam hye vayam labdhanandi bhavati. He's described in the Upanishads and in different places that he actually is rasa. So it's not that Krishna lets us suffer or Krishna lets us come to this material world because he doesn't value our relationship. In fact, he, like with the example of the gopis, he values the relationship over any actual, like, formality. Bhavagrahi Janardana. Another example is like Vidura. Krishna came to the home of Vidura, and Vidura was so ecstatic upon seeing him that he wanted to offer him some bananas, but because he was just so, you know, he'd lost himself in ecstasy, he was offering Krishna the banana peels instead of the actual banana. He was throwing out the actual fruit, and he was just offering Krishna the peels. And Krishna, being so loving of Vidura and so appreciative of his loving offering, Krishna actually ate the banana peels. And also there's the example of Sudama, he brought him some, you know, chipped rice or some broken rice. But still, Krishna accepted it, and he ate it right there. So, yeah, it's not that Krishna doesn't value the relationship between him and his devotees, and that's why he lets them come to this material world and suffer. But in fact, it's because Krishna values the relationship. It's because Krishna values that loving exchange that he allows us to come to the material world, which might seem contradictory. But one reason that's given is that Krishna, he's Lila Purushottama, so everything he does is for the sake of pastimes, is for the sake of relishing rasa. So you could say like an internal reason for Krishna's manifesting the material world is because that there are certain rasas, this is described in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, that aren't, you could say, compatible with the atmosphere of Vraj or the atmosphere of Vaikuntha. Those atmospheres, Vrindavan, there's a certain mood there. There's a certain kind of atmosphere that facilitates the relationships in that particular place. That's why Lakshmi Devi, she couldn't enter Vrindavan, because she didn't want to give up that opulent, that opulence. But it doesn't really fit with Vrindavan. Vrindavan's a forest. The whole thing is natural opulence, flowers, fruits, etc. But Lakshmi Devi, so she couldn't enter into that because she wasn't compatible with that atmosphere. And similarly, you see, you know, pure devotees who are on the platform of having achieved that Vraj Prem. They describe, you read in their prayers that they don't want the opulence of Vaikuntha. They don't want the kind of love that's relished in Vaikuntha. They want Vrindavan. So different places, different spiritual planets have different atmospheres. And so there's certain rasas or certain relationships that aren't compatible with those atmospheres. And Prabhupada describes in one place that one such rasa is like the ghastly rasa. So Prabhupada's talking about Hiranyakashipu in this verse. He talks about how he killed Hiranyakashipu in order to protect Prahlad Maharaj. So another reason Prabhupada gives is because he was relishing that rasa, that ghastly rasa, that, you know, ripping Hiranyakashipu open and his guts are everywhere and he was wearing a garland of intestines. There's a certain kind of rasa there, a certain kind of relationship that Krishna can't, that's not so compatible with the atmosphere of Vrindavan or the atmosphere of Vaikuntha. So Krishna comes to the material world and he relishes that rasa in order to complete his yeah, his unlimited variety of relationships with the living entities. So that's one thing. Another reason is that a relationship, any relationship, whether it's a material relationship, spiritual relationship, they say it's like a two-way street. So relationships require free will. They require that love is voluntarily given. Why was Krishna so indebted to the gopis? Because they had voluntarily given up, their husbands, their home, even their children in some cases. They risked their reputation by, being out in the middle of the night. They also risked their lives too, because, it's the forest. Krishna even says, when he's speaking to them, why'd you come out here? There's tigers and stuff in the woods. So they voluntarily risked practically everything. They risked their life, their actual, life, and also their social life for the sake of their love for Krishna. And so, in turn, he voluntarily gave up everything for them. He gave up all his love for them. He gave his time to them. He also risked his reputation for them. And so that's being brought up in the purport here, that it seems like that's partial. Krishna, he says, Samoham sarvabhuteshu. He says, I'm equally disposed to every living entity. Krishna doesn't make distinctions. But it seems like Krishna's making a distinction there. Why? Because he is. He is making a distinction. Although Krishna says he's not partial, actually we see that he is. He is partial. He's partial to his devotees. And Prabhupada says in the purport to this verse, Samoham sarvabhuteshu, he says it's natural. Although somebody might be impartial, naturally he's especially affectionate to his children, his wife, etc. But another way of looking at it, that may seem like a contradiction, but it's actually not. Because, for instance, with Hiranyakashipu, if Hiranyakashipu decided, okay, I'm going to give up my sinful ways, I'm going to surrender to Krishna, we're good now, then Krishna would have reciprocated with that. Krishna would have become partial to Hiranyakashipu. So Krishna, you could say he's like impartially partial. Krishna's willing to be partial to anyone, and in that way he's impartial. Anybody can come to him and become his devotee, and in that way Krishna will become partial to him. So the onus is really on the jiva, on the living entity, to right his wrong, you could say, that he did to Krishna. One example that is especially prevalent in the Bhagavatam is like Indra. I mean, so many times Indra really kind of made a bit of a fool of himself and offended Krishna in pretty severe ways. I don't think anybody's committed such a grave offense as to try to kill all of the Vrajvasis and Krishna himself. But Indra did that. He literally tried to kill all of the Vrajvasis, all of Krishna's eternal associates, and Krishna himself. And not only that, but he basically right after that, when Krishna went to the heavenly planets to get the Parijat tree for Satyabhama, he did it again, right after that. So there's so many instances of that, but every single time, Indra, he atoned for it. He went to Krishna, he said, I'm very sorry, please forgive me, and Krishna forgave him. And even after Indra tried to kill all the Vrajvasis, Krishna said, it's fine, just go back to the heavenly planets, continue doing what you're doing, just forget about it. So that is impartiality. That is Krishna. Like there's that verse, Abhichet Suduracharo, even though somebody might commit abominable activities, if he still is endeavoring to worship the Supreme Personality of God, become a devotee of the Supreme Personality of God, and then he's to be considered saintly. That's impartiality. Krishna is willing to forgive anyone. Any of the living entities can come approach Krishna at any time and say, Krishna, I'm surrendering to you, I want to be your devotee. And Krishna will accept them. So Krishna consciousness means relearning how to love Krishna. It means coming out of the darkness of sinful life and endeavoring to be reaccepted into the fold of Krishna's eternal associates. And so one who practices Krishna consciousness under the guidance, of course, of a sadhu, of a bona fide spiritual master, then these different qualities of the liberated souls, like I mentioned, these 21 qualities, in the conditioned state, these are covered. They're unmanifest. For instance, intrinsically of the nature of knowledge and bliss. The conditioned souls aren't of the nature of knowledge and bliss. They have no knowledge, they have no bliss. They suffer in ignorance. But when one practices Krishna consciousness under the guidance of a bona fide spiritual master, sincerely, then the qualities of the Atma, the Jiva, become manifest once again. And he experiences bliss and he gets knowledge. It's described in the Chaitanya Charitamrita that the witch of Maya flees. So at that point, then the living entity, he is reaccepted into the, say like the Swarup Shakti. Then he starts acting within the Swarup Shakti, and then he actually manifests his nature as a doer. He's actually acting beyond just being pulled by the material energy. And when he does this, he becomes filled with, it's described that he becomes filled with rati, with attraction. And because this rati, or this attraction to Krishna, is rooted within the Hladini Shakti, within Krishna's pleasure potency, then Jiva Goswami describes that actually the devotee, although he's Tatastha Shakti, he's the marginal energy, he can go either way, he actually becomes one with the Hladini Shakti. So Krishna, although a living entity may have been extremely sinful, I mean, who knows how many sins we've committed, who knows what to speak of how grave the sins we've committed were throughout our various lifetimes. Krishna is willing to accept us as basically one with the Hladini Shakti, which is the basis of his pleasure, the basis of Krishna's transcendental happiness. Krishna is willing to accept us as an integral part of his spiritual pleasure, as an integral part of his experience in the spiritual world. So this is real impartiality, but it comes with the sacrifice. We have to, just like the gopis, we have to voluntarily give up everything for Krishna. We have to give up. There's a verse that's in the Chaitanya Bhagavatam where Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he's speaking about Mukunda Datta. During Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's Mahaprakash Lila, where he was exhibiting various, you could say, expressions of his godhood, and he was giving benedictions to different devotees. One of the devotees, or some of the devotees, said, "Okay, let's go get Mukunda." And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, "No, don't bring him. I don't want to see him." And the reason he describes is because he says, "Korna donta trinaloy, kone jati mare, o kora jati abeta, na dekibe more." He says, Mukunda, he holds a stick in one hand. He serves me, or he holds a blade of grass, which is like a symbol of humility, grass between the teeth, or straw, you could say. And with the other hand, he beats me. So he holds a stick in one hand and a piece of grass in the other hand. And so Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says that somebody who holds grass in one hand and a stick in the other, he can't see me. Na dekibe more. He doesn't see me. He won't. In fact, he says, na dekibe. Dekibe is the future tense. He says he won't see me. So for as long as we maintain our material conceptions, our material attachments, our desires for material sense gratification, our desires for material advancement, to the degree we retain those, to that degree we can't see Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. To that degree we can't see Krishna. So putting down the stick means relinquishing our material attachments, means relinquishing our material conceptions and surrendering wholeheartedly to Krishna, becoming sincere, understanding that all these things are just fleeting and temporary and not pleasing to Krishna. Of course, there's systems by which one can work through these attachments. It's not that one has to just take sannyas or go to the forest or something like that. Krishna gives different systems by which one can work through those attachments. But the ultimate element, the ultimate thing is renunciation. One should develop a mentality of renunciation, even if one is still working through certain material desires. For example, in the Grihastha ashram, the Grihastha ashram is a way by which somebody can work through their material attachments or work with their material attachments. But the ultimate goal of all these various processes is ultimately to renunciate. Sarva dharman prityaja mamekam sharanam vraja. Ultimately, renunciation of all one's material conceptions and wholehearted, sincere surrender to Krishna. And so, as we go about our practice of Krishna consciousness, we can keep this in mind and pray to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu that we can put down the stick, that he gives us the strength to put down the stick and to just accept the blade of grass of humility and wholehearted surrender to the spiritual master and to Krishna. It was a little bit late. I'll stop there. And if there's some discussion, questions. Yes, Prabhu. There's a microphone there. We have some people on Zoom.
Haribol, thank you for your lecture. Really inspiring. We know from Bhagavad Gita that Krishna knows everything about past, present, future, full knowledge. Mm-hmm. My question is if also the jiva knows everything about past, present, and future in its pure form, not conditioned form. Yeah. This is the question.
Oh, okay. So does the jiva know about past, present, and future in its liberated form? No, it doesn't. There's only a certain. Krishna has full knowledge. So Krishna says, like in Bhagavad Gita, that he knows past, present, and future. Vedaham samatitani vartamanani charjana bhavishyani chaputani mam tu veda nakashchana. So he says that I know everything about everybody, and I know past, present, and future. But he says, nobody knows me. Because Krishna, he's unlimited. His knowledge is unlimited. His everything is unlimited. All these qualities that are listed in Shastra, Krishna possesses those unlimitedly. So we have some amount of knowledge. Definitely in the liberated state, we have much more knowledge than we have now. But in terms of knowing past, present, and future, that's something only Krishna knows. Because Krishna created everything. Krishna's above time, he's above everything. So he knows these things, but we can't with our, like this purport is saying, we're a small particle, sukshma, whereas the Supreme Lord is all-pervading and great. So we can only know so much. Yeah.
Thank you.
And think Dravida Prabhu has something.
I remember many years ago, there was a philosophical debate going on about whether Prabhupada was omniscient. And I did some research, I wrote a paper on it and everything, and went on to, I forget the site it was on in that time. But one of the things that came out there was that no, the living entity, no living entity can never be omniscient, which is what you're talking about, past, present, future, everything that goes on. Because one of the necessities, prerequisites of being omniscient is being omnipresent. You think about it, how does Krishna know everything that's going on right now, everything that everyone is thinking? I mean, it's inconceivable, because he's there in the heart of every living soul. But the living entity doesn't have that quality, and can't have it, and therefore there's no question of omniscience. Although he can become much more wise and knowledgeable than in the conditioned state, but there's a limit, as you pointed out. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruru. Anything more? So?
Did have one question for you, actually. In the spiritual world, you said there's unlimited devotees. Can Krishna give himself wholeheartedly 100% to all those devotees?
Yes. He does. Not only can he, but he does. Yeah.
How? Like,
yeah, actually, yeah, even the ones that are here in the material world, he's giving himself wholeheartedly. Because Krishna's unlimited. Krishna has unlimited love to give. Krishna has unlimited, say, heart to give. So, yeah, just like it's described, Krishna was, well, one example, yeah, there's two main examples. One of them is the Rasa dance. That's like the more famous one. Krishna in the Rasa dance, all of the gopis, although Srimati Radharani was in the center and all the other gopis were dancing with Krishna around Krishna and Srimati Radharani. Well, first of all, he expanded himself to dance with all of them at the same time. But every single gopi there was like millions, literally millions of gopis there. Every single one of them felt that I'm here with Krishna only. They all felt that Krishna is reciprocating with me the most, that I'm the most dear to Krishna right now. Of course, Krishna left because of that. But they had that feeling because Krishna was giving himself wholeheartedly to all of them. So there's no limit to that. It's not like Krishna gave himself to all the gopis, but the calves and the cowherd boys and everything like that, they're all, no, Krishna can reciprocate with everybody. And actually in the Brahma Vimohana Lila, after Lord Brahma took away all the calves and the cowherd boys, he specifically arranged that pastime so that he could wholeheartedly give himself to all of the Vrajvasis so that they could personally serve him and that he could personally reciprocate with them. He expanded himself into all the calves and the cowherd boys, and then all of the cows got the opportunity to give their milk, personally feed Krishna. And all the mothers of all the various cowherd boys got the opportunity to personally dress them and serve them, and hold them, embrace them. So, yeah, Krishna definitely reciprocates unlimitedly with all the devotees in the spiritual world. Even the blades of grass, even the cows, even the trees, everybody. Yeah, oh yeah, and this, of course, the 16,108 queens in Dwarka. Krishna expanded himself and he reciprocated with all of them. Anything else? Okay, anything on Zoom? Okay. Okay, Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Patita Pavana Srila Prabhupada ki jai.